I'm Andrew, co-founder and COO of Livestock Labs, really a cell-cultivated meat startup. And it's an honor to be here today to talk with you all about really one of my favorite subjects, the future of meat, and more specifically, a revolutionary new approach to producing protein. Over the last few hundred years, we've revolutionized almost every industry you can imagine. Communication, transportation, energy, you name it. The one really industry we have not revolutionized is animal agriculture. We have really been growing meat the same way for the last 10,000 years. Sure, we've gotten more productive, it's more efficient now, but in no way, shape, or form is this necessarily bettering our lives. In fact, a lot of people would probably rather go back 1,000 years and how we used to farm animals. It really wasn't until the revolutionary Winston Churchill who thought of what meat could look like in the future, when in 1931, he stated, "We shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat just the breast or the wing by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium." Now, Winston Churchill thought we would get to this point about 50 years after he made that speech, and he was off by quite a few decades. However, in 2013, a Dutch scientist, Mark Post, sponsored by Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, created the first ever cell-cultivated burger made for human consumption at a whopping cost of $330,000. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the process of cultivated meat or what cultivated meat is, we are talking about real meat, real muscle, real fat, real connective tissue, just grown in a completely new way. Essentially, what you're doing here is you're taking a small, non-invasive, harmless biopsy from an animal about the size of half a grain of rice. You're putting those cells in a cultivator. Think of a giant steel tank, similar to what you might brew beer in. This mimics the animal's body, so it's the same CO2 level, same oxygen level, same temperature. You're then feeding those cells everything an animal typically eats, just broken down. Amino acids, sugars, carbs, starches. And after 2 to 7 weeks, depending on the scale, the size of the cultivator, you're then harvesting that meat and making end products exactly as you'd wish. Really designer products, the ratio of fat to muscle that you'd like, and so forth. And so now that we know that this is physically possible, companies around the world have now done this in one way or another, and now for much less than $330,000. The real question is, should we be doing this? Why did Winston Churchill say the conventional way of growing meat is absurd? Do we really want to be eating meat that is grown out of steel tanks? Is this really necessary? And the short answer is yes. By 2050, meat demand is expected to grow by 70%. And we simply do not have the planetary resources to supply that demand. And we can showcase that here with really how we use what we have on Earth's surface, which right now on the planet, about 29% is made up of land. Of that, about 71% is suitable to life. And of that, about 50% is currently used for agriculture. The other 48% is dedicated to nature, 1% for urban area, 1% for fresh water. But if we look into that 50% just used for agriculture, you'll see that we're using about 77% of that land specifically for livestock. Yet, it only gives us 18% of our calories and only 37% of our protein, really showing you that it is vastly inefficient. And if we do want to supply 70% more meat from animals by 2050, we're essentially going to need about double the size of India in land use. So before we decide to wipe out about twice the size of India of rainforests, really good fertile soil, I just want to show kind of a crazy stat, which is currently the biomass of mammals currently on our planet and what that makeup looks like, which is 60% livestock, about 36% humans, and 4% wildlife. So if we start wiping out about 2 times India, we could say goodbye to about half that wildlife that we know and love today. Unfortunately, all these statistics really don't matter. In fact, I could go on for days about why industrial animal agriculture is unsustainable, whether it's greenhouse gases, land use, antibiotic use, water pollution, air pollution, you name it. None of these statistics really make that much of a difference, because the second any of us start smelling brisket that's been grilling for 8+ hours, all those statistics leave our head. Cognitive dissonance is in full swing. We're getting in line for this brisket, and we're eating more than we could even eat that day. We want leftovers because it's just that good. We crave it. It's primal. And so if you ever want to really see real change, you can never ask anybody to take what they love off the table. It's just not in our DNA as a species. You really have to put something even better on the table. And that's essentially what cultivated meat is offering. Here I show you 3 of what I deem to be some of the best meats on the planet. You have A5 Wagyu beef, you have bluefin otoro, and Iberico Bellota jamon. Now, what makes these so delicious is a combination of different factors, 3 of which are their genetics, their diet, and really their overall lifestyle. Unfortunately for us, you really cannot scale this to the masses. So unfortunately, maybe we can spoil ourselves with getting, one of these on a special occasions, a birthday, an anniversary, a raise, but it's never going to be able to scale. Cultivated meat really changes all of this. No longer are we limited by the biological limitations of a full animal. We are now growing meat with a first principles mindset from the cells up. We can use the exact genetics that we want. We can find out what are the food compounds that deliver such tasty and nutritional meat. And we could design cultivators that literally give these cells the best environment that they can thrive in. And so the promise of cultivated meat is not just to give you a 1-to-1 beef, a 1-to-1 chicken, a 1-to-1 pork. It is to give you the most delicious, nutritious meat imaginable at scale. And I know this as my current company, Livestock Labs, is currently working on the core building blocks that makes this all possible, the cells themselves. You could almost think of us as the molecular butchers for the cultivated meat industry. We are not actually growing the meat itself, just developing the cells based on what this industry requires to deliver the best tasting and most nutritious meat imaginable, and then licensing these out to companies worldwide based on those characteristics. You could think of us as the NVIDIA for the bioeconomy. Instead of creating powerful chips for electronics, we are creating powerful cells for biomanufacturing. Now, what we're asking of these cells is very complex. If we are going to make the most delicious and nutritious meat imaginable, that can scale to a level that gives them commodity prices. And so when we get these requests that we need these changes, by going into the DNA and into the genome of these cell lines, we can deliver an unlimited amount of phenotypes or characteristics. We're essentially creating designer cells, which then lead to designer meat. So for a real quick example of one thing that we could do relatively easily, instead of creating a 1-to-1 bacon, which is a known class 1 carcinogen due to trans fat, we can create a healthy bacon with omega-3 fatty acids. So really a bacon that you probably shouldn't be eating all too much, to a bacon that would be doctor recommended. And beyond flavor and nutrition, you're also designing these cell lines to thrive in giant cultivators so we can bring cells or bring the cost of this meat down to everyday low prices, to where you shouldn't have to just wait for your anniversary or a birthday or a raise to eat a phenomenal tasting meal, but that every meal you have should be orgasmic. That is the promise of cultivated meat. So a lot of you are probably looking up here and with a little skepticism. There's a long way to go until we can have cultivators of this size producing commodity prices, and you should have that skepticism. But let's just say theoretically, we can produce the most delicious meat imaginable that will make Iberico Bellota Jamon, A5 Wagyu seem like yesterday's best quality meat. How do we get there? Well, it starts with a little bit of funding. And so to paint a little picture, this industry over the last 10 years has raised about $3 billion from venture capitalists, but also from the biggest meat companies in the world. The Tysons, the JBSs, the Cargill, Mitsubishi should be on this list. And they're investing in this because they understand the demand that's coming, and they know the planetary resources that they really have to work with to supply this demand. They see that cultivated meat is much more efficient. You can grow this much quicker than any animal, even the most efficient chicken, and of course takes up to a year for some seafood species and cow. And even more so on the efficiency side is the feed conversion ratio. This is the calories as food as inputs versus the food as outputs. And so with cultivated meat, you are only dedicating calories to what you're growing, the muscle, the fat, connective tissue, or whatever tissue types are of interest. You don't need to waste calories on hooves, on hair, on bones, on just sustaining the life of that animal for over a year. And of course, a lot of these companies see that they're going to start having to pay these externality taxes, and cultivated meat is less on greenhouse gases, land use, water use, air pollution, really you name it. Although to be fair, I should point out that in the bottom left, chicken is technically more efficient when it comes to greenhouse gas than cultivated meat, in a large part due to the energy use. As we are growing these indoors in giant cultivators, it does require a lot of energy. And so to be fair, this industry really is going to be reliant on renewable energy, which in this day and age, I think is quite the safe bet. But again, most importantly, it comes down to the product. And these companies see that cultivated meat is a way to create a much more superior meat product. We're talking about no antibiotics, no heavy metals, no contaminants, no pathogens, no microplastics. If you're pregnant, eat all the sushi you want. If you go to the store right now and purchase a raw chicken, you better cook that chicken to have an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, or you're going to have a bad night, probably a bad week. The odds are not in your favor. With cultivated meat, because it's grown in a sterile environment, it's not, manufactured in a slaughterhouse where it mixes with intestines and feces and everything else. We are talking about the most pure meat imaginable that's blown the mind of regulatory agencies. And so what we're talking about is sashimi grade everything. Now, with all this hype, with all this excitement, with the $3 billion, there's been a ton of companies starting to enter this space worldwide. And as of 2023, we've had about 174 companies just dedicated to working on cultivated meat, arguably around 250 or so companies working on cultivated meat in some significant way. Unfortunately, all the graphs in this industry are not up and to the right. And so to kind of showcase you where we currently are and where we've been, you could really trace the life cycle of cultivated meat through the Gartner hype cycle, which is a very typical hype cycle of a revolutionary new technology that is challenging to develop. And so as we spoke about, that innovation trigger was the Mark Post burger, built a lot of hype in this space. From 2018 to 2021, we reached the peak of inflated expectations where companies were raising hundreds of millions of dollars without a product, without regulatory approval, without any revenue. It was a wild time to be in the industry. As you can imagine, with hype that high, you expect deliverables. This industry is going to take some time. It takes some time to scale those cultivators, to build out supply chains, and to obtain regulatory approval. And so with that, you saw the industry start to drop into what's called the trough of disillusionment, which happened around 2023, and now kind of slowly climbing out of that. And in this time, you see companies go out of business, you see some layoffs, you see some bad press, you see industry incumbents starting to attack this new technology that could be taking a part of their market share. You see states like Florida starting to ban cultivated meat. It is illegal to grow or sell cultivated meat in the state of Florida. Quickly followed was Mississippi and Alabama. Now, I tend to take the Gandhi approach here, where first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then they join you, and we're in stage 3 right now. That's pretty good progress. Also, as a native Floridian born in Tampa, I know that especially the South as a whole does not like big government telling them what they can and can't do, so I'm confident that these kind of protectionist laws will be off the books soon, and the free market can soon decide. But even with all these kind of negative publicity, the trough of disillusionment, Pandora's box has been opened, and this industry is well under its way. And one exciting graph that really shows you this is the academic literature that has come out in this space and really just exploded in the last 7 years, almost doubling each year. And so these are PhDs diving deep into every aspect of the business, the cell lines, the cultivators, the scaffolds, the media, the nutritional broth that feeds these cells, consumer acceptance, everything you could imagine, and just continuing to grow and move the needle, making this a reality. That said, as you can imagine, $3 billion in a few hundred academic papers, let alone a few thousand academic papers, are really not going to disrupt a 10,000-year-old commodity industry that still gets billions of dollars in subsidies year after year. So really, is this going to happen in our lifetime? What is going to actually make this possible or give us hope that we can potentially start eating the most delicious and nutritious meat imaginable meal after meal? And really, it's going to come from government and global competition. And it starts with food security. So Singapore, the first country in the world that approved cultivated meat, approved it due to their 30 by 30 goals. They wanted to produce 30% of their own food by 2030, and cultivated meat allowing this island nation to do just that. In the first panel, I showcased where soon after that, China added cultivated meat to their 5-year agricultural plan. They just doubled down on it just this past month. And you have countries like Saudi Arabia investing $200,000 from their sovereign wealth fund into this technology, because now for the first time ever, a desert nation can produce all of their own meat. They no longer have to be exporters. This was never thought possible until a technology like cultivated meat came about. And this naturally moves to jobs. It's going to be a massive industry. The Biden administration, some of its biggest executive orders were pushing biomanufacturing and biotechnology. Who is going to be really the future producers of protein? The US invested heavy and developed most of the technology behind solar panels and semiconductors. Yet when we didn't invest in the manufacturing of that, we now quickly lost that to China and Taiwan, where we buy most of our solar panels and semiconductors. Are we now going to lose the race to the future of protein, which leads to national security? Earlier I mentioned how Florida, Mississippi, Alabama made cultivated meat illegal to produce and to sell, and a lot of you are probably thinking, with this administration, cultivated meat's probably going to have another tough 3 years. Well, the 11 signatures I have listed here are from 11 Republicans that recently wrote to Homeland Security and National Intelligence, just sharing with them the threats of what will happen if the US does lose this race to a country like China. Right now, China is a net importer in animal products, where the US is a net exporter. And if those roles reverse, the leverage that the US has on the global stage and negotiations will vastly diminish. So this really is a huge risk or a huge boom for whatever countries really start to invest in this technology. And so you'll start to see, and have already really seen, tens of millions of dollars pumping into this, and even more allowing this to become a reality, hoping giving us more options and even better tasting and more nutritious meat on our plates that also just so happens to be sustainable. Now I'm talking a lot as if this is really far into the future, and in some ways it is, but it also is here now, and it's being led by really some of the greatest chefs out there. Jose Andres was the first chef in the US to serve a cultivated meat product, partnered with Upsides Foods, at his restaurant in Washington, D.C. Dominique Crenn served Good Meat's cultivated chicken at her 3-star Michelin restaurant in San Francisco. And then even on the more exotic side, you have companies like Val out of Australia serving meats that have never been seen before. A quail foie gras being served right now in Singapore and Hong Kong. And just to show you really how we are only now limited by our imagination, is that same company Val just last year produced a woolly mammoth meatball, literally a meatball from an extinct species. With a little bit of DNA, the diversity of what we can make right now, the nutritional profiles that we can develop, the flavors that we have, it's completely open to our creativity. This is not just making meat a little more sustainable or a little more better. This is a huge jump that we have not seen in this type of industry for the last 10,000 years. This is going from Morse code to the iPhone, from the horse to the plane. Our great-grandchildren are going to look back at what we used to eat and just feel sad for us because of the everyday phenomenal foods they're going to be eating. And so with that, I'll stop. I know it's not something a lot of people like to talk about, is technology and how their food is made. We want to see the beautiful cow on the green pasture in front of the red barn. We don't want to really see how the sausage is made or even how cultivated meat is engineered and developed. But I hope here today I was able to at least paint a picture of what's coming, give you some optimism, and just know that the level of diversity that's going to be coming to our plate, the flavor profiles, the nutrition, is unbelievably exciting. And so I'm happy to answer any questions, and if we don't get to those questions, my contact information right here, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is obviously my favorite topic. If you want to get into the industry, play any sort of role, I'd be happy to talk. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we don't have woolly mammoth samples at the back for this one.
I'm sorry.
We tried. I'm going to open it up because I'm pretty sure the audience is going to have some interesting questions here. From my perspective, you showed a few examples there of some of the top chefs that are using it in restaurants. How long realistically before me as a consumer can buy this walking down a supermarket aisle?
So in the supermarket where it's going to be served, let's say not as a marketing stunt, but as an actual product where a company can be generating revenue, I would say realistically we're looking at 10 years. A lot of this depends on consumer acceptance, how they're pushing this, government funding that goes into this. But really, as even we saw from our last talk, with the power of AI and machine learning and how we could speed up these processes, it's exponentially going forward every year. As you saw those academic papers just doubling each year, this is growing incredibly fast. So it could be much sooner, but I know this industry is known for saying it'll be here 5 years from now, no matter when you ask them, 2013, 2018, 2020. So I'll say 10 years we should see this, at least in some retailers and restaurants around the nation.
Who will do this first? This is an event to look into the future. So which country will lead the way on this? Who will win that battle that you showed there between different countries and the battle for protein, as you said?
You know, it's going to start because there does need to be a lot of funding to build this infrastructure that we have. So it's going to be the countries that have the funds to support this type of technology. America really is the leader for innovation when it comes to funding innovative technologies. And so optimistically, I really believe America could be that country, but it's going to be fueled by the threats of countries like China. But you're seeing Japan, Korea, all over the Middle East, Israel, Australia actually just approved a cultivated meat product for the first time, really just this past week. So it's going to be a competition of nations, which is going to fuel everybody else to keep pumping more funds into this. But right now, I would absolutely say America is leading in this with the amount of startups in this space and the amount of funding.
And do you see this coexisting with traditional farming, or, you showed some startling figures there on the impact that meat production has on the planet. Is this the death of pastures full of those cows eating the grass?
I don't think we're anywhere close to that. Right now it is going to take everybody. So whether it's cultivated meat, plant-based, fermentation-derived ingredients. A lot of these are going to be working together in the years to come to make this come to market a lot sooner. So you might not see 100% cultivated meat product, but a hybrid of sorts that does deliver on flavor and nutrition and gets customers really understanding of what this is. Conventional meat is not going to go away anytime soon. That being said, when it comes to customers, really what you need to deliver is flavor and is price. And so if that flavor dramatically is better than conventional meat and the price point is better than conventional meat, and it's shown that the nutritional characteristics are aligned, if not even better, then maybe for our generation, it's almost hard to imagine conventional meat going away. But 2 generations from now, it's a completely new world. They're going to be maybe shocked by how we processed 80 billion land animals every year, 80 billion seafood animals every year, not including any bycatch or anything like that. So time will tell.
Like the arrogant part of myself is like, I could tell the difference. My palate is good enough if you put them side by side, but I'm sure I wouldn't. Yours might even taste better.
The problem is there's no difference for the most part. They are on a cellular level the same exact thing. You are not giving up meat. You're just really trading it for a different way of how it's being processed. But it's the same meat you've always known and loved.
Well, please, huge round of applause for Andrew.
Thank you.
Really good.